Revolutionary talk for revolutionary times. Promoting peace, liberty, and prosperity around the clock. LibertyTalk.fm.
Welcome to Living the Solution with Dr. Elena George. Today we have an important show, one that I think not a lot of people know a lot about. We live here in the South, and there's a lot of issues with mold and mold toxicity. And for my practice at ENT, we see a lot of patients with sinus infections, allergy, asthma associated with response to mold. And today we're going to speak with somebody who can not only speak about that, but how it affects us, how our nutrition could either help us or hurt us. And we're going to have a holistic view of how we can take care of ourselves. First, you have to identify the problem, but really what's most important is that we're going to talk about the solutions, because Ms. Cooke is somebody who spends her life and has created a business designed to do this. So today we're going to speak with Ms. Cathy Cooke. She's the owner and founder of Whole Home and Body Health. She's a Board Certified Holistic Nutritionist with the National Association of Nutrition Professionals. She uses a functional medicine approach to help people identify imbalances in the body. She's also a certified building biology environmental consultant and certified electromagnetic radiation specialist with the Building Biology Institute. She assesses buildings for anything that may be causing health problems, including indoor air quality, mold, chemical off-gassing, ventilation, and EMF exposure. Combining holistic nutrition and building biology, she addresses both the body and environment to help her clients achieve optimal health. She's also the founder of Idahoans for Safe Technology, an advocacy and awareness group for the safer use of modern-day communications. And although she's originally from Kansas, Missouri, she now makes her living in Boise, Idaho. So, Ms. Cooke, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Me too, Dr. George. I'm so honored to speak with you about this really important topic.
It certainly is. And I find it's become a real tool in my practice now that I'm more aware of mold and what that can do for patients. And let's start off at the beginning. What exactly got you into this? And what is a holistic nutritionist?
Okay, good questions. So I got into this field because, like so many people, I dealt with my own health challenges for decades, and I sadly could not get any answers from the conventional medical system. So I spent many, many years studying and researching health, and I found that the answers for me lied in more of a functional medicine arena and natural approaches, meaning that I needed to find the underlying reason why I was sick instead of trying to suppress my symptoms with pharmaceuticals, which tends to be the standard of care in the Western medical system. So after, maybe a 20-year career in nonprofit work and historic preservation, I decided to become a holistic nutritionist because I had found on my health journey that food was an incredibly powerful instigator for me, and none of the doctors I had ever seen had ever asked me anything about my diet, which it just dumbfounds me because it's so important and so powerful. And so I became a holistic nutritionist in 2013, and I chose to be a holistic nutritionist instead of a registered dietitian because I was more in tune with the holistic approach because that's what had worked for me. And then after a couple of years of working as a nutritionist, I really had everything dialed in. My diet was great. My lifestyle habits were, really dialed in, and I was managing my stress and all the things you're supposed to do, but I still wasn't nearly as well as I knew that I could be. I still had some significant insomnia, anxiety, tinnitus, and a few other lingering issues. So this is when I discovered the arena of mold and EMF. And it turns out I had both issues going on in my life. And when I addressed those, it really was a massive turning point for me. And that is when I started to truly heal and truly get better. And so after that experience, I knew that if I was going to continue to help my clients, that I needed to know this environmental piece as well, because it's essential.
Mm-hmm.
So I went back to school at the Building Biology Institute and started to work as a building biologist since then.
Well, that's a great story. And, you don't know what you don't know. And from a medical side, there's, you see patients and there's something going on and you can't put your finger on it. And all the testing that you do, the standard testing, doesn't show a thing. And I'm still struck by an experience I had with a patient who I hadn't seen for a while. And she came back and she looked like she had some sort of neurological condition, Parkinson's. She was stuttering, couldn't get her speech right. It was amazing. And then we did a mold workup. And it turns out that her house was, her bedroom was inundated with this toxic mold under the floorboards. So she'd been exposed to this for years. Unfortunately, she had to move. She had to get rid of her clothes. She had to be detoxed. But she's now working again, back in business. And, imagine all the meds that she would have been on, never getting her quality of life back. It's like you're treating the symptom, but not the problem. So my question to you is, we think of mold, you think of something that's musty, you see leaks, you see black mold in your environment. But is that always how it presents, or is it more subtle?
Oh, yes, that is a very important question, because it does not always present that way. In fact, the best mold and air quality inspectors in the world will tell you a story of how they did a top to bottom investigation of a home, as thorough as they could possibly be, took the air samples, took an ERMI, took dust samples to test their home, and everything checked out perfectly fine. Meanwhile, there is a source of mold growing maybe behind a wall cavity, like you mentioned, underneath the floorboards. When we're assessing a home or a building, we try to be as unobtrusive as possible, because we don't want to drill holes in somebody's home or pull carpets up. And the clients don't always want us to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's not always practical nor reasonable. But in these situations where it's hidden and you can't see it, it can really delay healing and the appropriate treatment for years, if not, or they might not ever find it, because it's so well contained. And unfortunately, our sampling methods are not great at identifying even these contained sources, because certain mold spores, for example, Stachybotrys, which is one of the molds that people consider the quote-unquote black toxic mold, it's very heavy, and so it can fall to the ground. And if we're doing an air sample in someone's home, for example, we probably aren't going to pick that up. So there's a lot of tools that we use, but they're not 100%. And so somebody might not know that they're living in a moldy house. And even if you get it inspected or you do samples, it's not 100% guarantee that you've identified a source. And in other situations, we like to say black mold or black toxic mold, but it really doesn't matter what the color is. It could be orange, it could be purple. I've seen pretty much every color of the rainbow of different molds that cause symptoms in people, and you could be getting it from your food. You could be getting it from things like, the silicone rubber gasket in your water bottle that you've never washed, or under your blender that you've never, gotten under there and cleaned that out. I mean, there's sources in your home that you would be surprised that people aren't paying attention to that could expose you. And if you're highly sensitive to this, or you have what we call the HLA gene, which means that you don't have a really easy time processing or getting rid of the mold, you can be sensitive to even small exposures like that. So it can come from a lot of different places.
Wow, that's awesome. That's something that make you think. It's not always in your face, but if you have an issue, maybe this is something that you and your doctor need to investigate and think outside the box. So let's take our first break, because I want to ask you some of the symptoms. We talked loosely about them, but I want people to understand that it is subtle. So let's take our first break and come back. You're living in the solution. Welcome back to Living the Solution. We're speaking with Miss Cathy Cooke. You need to go to her website, wholehomeandbodyhealth.com. It's a wealth of information. You can learn more about her company. They do mold, indoor air testing, EMF assessments, and also health coaching. So this is a one-stop shop that you can take care of yourself and get somebody who knows what they're doing. So before the break, Ms. Cooke, you were getting into the subtleties of whether you think your house is mold infested or not. But what are some of the symptoms? For me, I'm going to see people with nasal congestion, sinus infections, loss of smell, all sorts of, chest congestion. But are there other symptoms that people need to look for, neurological, psychological?
Yeah. So you're right. Some of the most common symptoms that people present with will be that, allergy type symptoms, the nasal congestion, watery eyes, itchy eyes, puffiness. Asthma is something that's triggered from a mold exposure a lot of the times. And then when we get into the more serious symptoms, I have seen people present with a large array of symptoms, including headaches. Headaches and fatigue are two of the biggest. Even menstrual irregularities, muscle weakness, food sensitivities, gut issues, infertility issues. I have a close colleague who works with a lot of cancer patients, and she, as a standard approach to treatment, she tests every single person for mold because she finds that the majority of her clients actually do have an underlying mold issue. So we can make a correlation that it's going to weaken your immune system in many different ways, which can lead to further complications down the road. So it's really very varied across the board and different for everybody. But those are some classic symptoms right there.
That's a lot. I wouldn't even think of infertility. It's amazing. And we're seeing so many people with all of these symptoms, and I'm thinking that they're being misdiagnosed possibly and just medicated to treat the symptom without looking at the root cause. I mean, especially things that are anxiety or depression related, something that's more psychological. No one's really looking at that, are they?
You're absolutely right. And I'm glad that you mentioned the neurological symptoms again, because I didn't really touch on that, but that's a very, very big clue as well. Like you said, you've dealt with a client who had Parkinson's-like symptoms, and mold, it will grow inside you. I mean, mold is part of our regular biome, along with bacteria and viruses and some parasites. We normally have that, but when mold grows out of control and it's unchecked, it can absolutely affect your nervous system. And Parkinson's, I've seen Alzheimer's-like symptoms, depression, mood issues, even anger. And a lot of young kids I've seen some pretty tremendous mood stability issues, including anger and outbursts, which, as I'm sure you've seen, what does that mean? If you take your child who's got behavior issues to traditional medical doctor, they're going to be labeled with ADD or ADHD, and they're going to be on a lifetime of medication. And like you're saying, if we could only find that the issue is actually this fungal overgrowth and treat that, then we could save years and decades of a misdiagnosis and potentially hazardous medications, because that's not really what they're dealing with. So we've got to find that underlying issue and treat that so that we can actually make progress, heal, and move forward.
Agreed. Now, but let's talk, because you know a lot about the building biology and how the homes and offices are nidus or source of this issue. Is there something about the building materials? Is there something, I mean, obviously if someone has a leak, I get that. Your basement flooded, stuff happens, or a pipe burst. But is there anything intrinsic about the materials that are being used or the construction technique that makes this more likely to happen?
Absolutely. So, it's interesting because I also do historic preservation work, and before I got into the building biology field, I was doing historic preservation, which means that I was actually working, rehabbing and restoring historic buildings. And I've done this for over a decade and worked on many buildings. And people tell me, "Oh my gosh, how could you do that? You must be exposed to mold. You must be exposed to all these hazards."
Mm-hmm.
And what I tell them is, surprisingly, no, I'm not, because these historic buildings were built with natural building material. They were built with brick or wood or stone, and they were not built with drywall. They were not built for energy efficiency in the way that our modern homes are, which means that they're wrapped in Tyvek or plastic, and they're closed up to be as energy efficient as possible. And what this means is the buildings do not breathe. So they're more likely to have condensation buildup. And we've got these, things like the drywall, which has paper on it, and which is cellulose, and mold loves paper. It loves cellulose. So we enclose our buildings as tight as possible. We never open windows because we want our, HVAC system set at 72 degrees all year round. And that traps condensation. And then we've got this paper and, on our drywall, which is the perfect food for mold to grow. And we've kind of just created this perfect little warm, moist environment with food source for our mold. To top it off, all of our modern day building materials are chemically based. So we're trapping in the chemicals as well. And we're weakening our immune systems, we're damaging our respiratory systems, so that when we are exposed to this mold, we have less of an ability to actually fight it off. So unfortunately, it has to do with our modern day building practices and building materials. And I'm thankful that there is a movement towards better building practices, but we're a ways off before that's affordable for everyone.
So knowing where we are in terms of our techniques, what are some of the strategies that you think people can use to lower that moisture? Is running a dehumidifier, air purifier, do those actually make a difference in HVAC that's actually able to filter?
They do. They absolutely do. And of course, it's going to depend on the environment that you're in. Especially here in the U.S., we've got pretty much every environment that exists. So I currently live in Idaho, which is southern Idaho, which is mostly desert. So there's not the moisture concerns that there are in a place, say, like Seattle and Portland. So the dehumidifier in this area would not necessarily be appropriate, but it would be in a place like Seattle where they get a significant amount of moisture year-round. Now, one thing I will say that I alluded to earlier is opening windows. We absolutely need to keep some fresh air return in our homes as often as possible. And if somebody's going to take anything out of this talk today, I want them to open their windows. And people say, well, it's not energy efficient, or it's cold, or it's hot. And to that I say, well, your health is worth a little drop in energy efficiency. Our buildings are not supposed to be 100% airtight. We have to have some air exchange. In fact, we want a full air exchange in our homes every hour, and mostly, nobody's doing that. So we have to have some outside air exchanging with the inside air as much as we can. And then another thing that I'm surprised that people don't do is turn on the fan in the bathroom when they're bathing. And they also don't turn on the hood in their kitchen when they're cooking, or they might not have one. And these are the two biggest sources of moisture we produce in our home on every day. So we need to get that air out of the building, that moist air out of the building. So turning on the bathroom fan for a good 15 minutes after you shower, and while you're cooking, and for about 15 minutes after, you leave that hood on so that you can exhaust all of that moisture. Meanwhile, it's imperative that you have one of your, at least a window, if not a couple windows, cracked while you're running the fan, because you need some makeup air. So when you're running the fan, if your home is tightly shut, you're going to pull moisture and air in through your crawl space. And your crawl space is notorious for mold spores and moisture. So you have to open windows to have a makeup air for the fans running. And just in general, you should have an air exchange going all the time. So cracking open windows. And then if you have a good air purifier, I think that's more important than ever. Dealing with the wildfires that most of the country is getting some fallout from. An air purifier is very important, as well as getting your ducts cleaned every 2 to 3 years. Most people do not do that, and the ductwork will build up dust and mold and bacteria, and it's just going to blow into your space and amplify your problem. So that's another thing that people need to put on their to-do list.
Since we're talking about the environment before we get to our nutrition, because I want to do that in the next segment, what role does EMF play in mold toxicity? I've read that they are somehow dovetail and they connect with each other and exacerbates the mold toxicity and sensitivity. How does that work?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of theories on this, and the science on EMF is still very young, so I think we're still trying to really solidify what we think. But there has been some research that has shown that EMF exposure will aggravate mold spores. It can also aggravate bacteria, and it can cause both the mold and the bacteria to release endotoxins or lipopolysaccharides from the bacteria, which is a toxic byproduct from both of these respectively, which can increase your symptoms quite a bit. So it aggravates them, making you feel worse. And some people believe that the EMF exposure can cause the mold to grow more quickly and more aggressively, which obviously is not good. And another factor is that when people start to develop symptoms from their EMF exposure, a lot of times there's what we call a precursor to that. So there's an underlying cause why people become sensitive, and mold exposure is one of them. And I will say that among the clients that I've worked with that are the most sensitive to EMF, almost all of them have had a significant mold exposure in their past. So for some reason, once you've had this mold exposure and, I don't know if it's an immune system issue or an oxidative stress issue or, the endotoxin release, they become highly sensitive to EMF and they're much less able to handle or mitigate their symptoms to EMF once they've had that extensive mold exposure.
It's interesting how that works. I mean, it's almost like it gets sensitized and you become hypersensitive. And then every time you get a hit, it piggybacks and it just gets worse. On that note, let's take our second break and come back. You're living in the solution.
If you miss Living in the Solution, you can catch it on drelenageorge.com, YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, and a host of multimedia platforms. You can follow her on Positive Solutions on Telegram and Living in Solution on Facebook. Subscribe and share it with your friends.
Welcome back to Living the Solution. We're speaking with Miss Cathy Cooke, and you need to go to her website again, wholehomeandbodyhealth.com. And, we're going to get into the nutrition side of this because you have a full service company. You have a complete wellness program and health coaching. And I think people need to understand what they put in their mouth really matters. People don't tend to think very much at all. And so let's talk about the nutritional side, because you have a wonderful synopsis of what we need to do to help our environment. Our body is really also, it houses this mold, doesn't it?
Exactly. Yes, absolutely. So, we have a certain amount of candida in our guts, which is a fungus. We have certain amounts of bacteria, which we, in the last 10, 20 years, we've started to notice that that's actually a very good thing, a critical thing for us to survive. So we have all kinds of microbes in our gut, but once they become out of balance, is when the real problems begin to happen. So candida can overgrow, mold can get, have an overgrowth where it's not part of the checks and balances anymore. And that's when so many of the symptoms begin to happen. And as we know, with the standard American diet, which is heavily devoid of nutrients and fiber, that's when our bacteria and other microbes begin to get out of balance because we're not feeding them appropriately. And then that's going to set us up for some significant health problems and symptoms. A lot of times people will say, oh, I have a gut of steel, I can eat anything. Well, when you dig a little bit deeper, oh, yeah, well, I do have anxiety, but doesn't everybody? Or, of course, I get depressed. I mean, that's just the American way, or that's just the modern world. And, I think people are overlooking their diet and how their diet is affecting their symptoms or their health problems because, unfortunately, it's inconvenient. And as most people have experienced, when you're asked to make changes in your diet, it can be very difficult for many reasons. So a lot of people just aren't willing to go there.
I think they need to start because it all starts in the gut. You just described anxiety and depression. Most people think it's a brain issue, but it's actually a gut health issue. And 70% of the immune system's in the gut. So if it's gone haywire, it would explain a lot about why people are becoming more susceptible and their immune system is not working like it should. So let's talk about diet, because you mentioned the American diet and it's got a lot of sugar, fats, and terrible stuff in it. What's the first thing, or I guess it's a loaded question, but how do you get people to start the path of cleaning their system so they can reset and rebalance?
Yes. Well, gosh, that's such a loaded question.
I know.
There's so many ways that we need to go with that. But if we're just going to talk about diet, one of the things that I like to do is have people eliminate grains. And I know that is, hotly debated topic of whether or not grains are really a problem. But in my experience, if somebody eliminates grains, you're going to eliminate most all packaged products. You're going to eliminate wheat, which if somebody comes to me and they're working with me, they've got health issues. So I think that eliminating wheat and grains that are difficult to digest is a very good place to start because, like I said, peripherally, you're just eliminating almost all junk food and all processed packaged foods, which is where the real problem is because of the sugar content, like you mentioned, and because of the industrial seed oils and all of the science they put into this packaged food, which does not belong there. So when you remove grains, what do you have left? You have meat, vegetables, fruits, and maybe some nuts and seeds. And that is a significant improvement for most Americans right there, because what you're eating are whole foods. Now, we can certainly fine tune that deeper on a deeper level, and everybody's unique and individual, so we're going to have to fine tune it for every unique person. But I mean, anybody listening, if they just did that one thing, they're 80% of the way there already.
So whole foods, just for the listeners, you have to pick it, you have to cook it, you have to use it in its natural state, right? It's not pre-packaged, it's not pre-anything for you. Is that your definition of whole foods? And it should be organic, correct?
Exactly. Yep, exactly. So a whole food is basically how it occurs in nature. So it might be an animal that you shoot and kill. It might be a plant that you pull from your garden. It might be a piece of fruit that you take off a tree. So those are all unprocessed foods that occur in their natural state. So that is what nature intended, and that is how we should approach our diet as nature intended. Organic is very important, and I would also say, if you're going to consume animal products, which again I know works for some people, not for everybody, but if you are, then it needs to be pasture-based animal products, some of these labels, like if you buy a pound of ground beef and it says grass-fed, that doesn't actually mean anything, because all cattle are grass-fed for the first several months of their life, and then they're finished on corn to help fatten them up. Mm-hmm. So it needs to be 100% grass-fed, pasture-raised, organically sourced fruits and vegetables. So the quality really does make a big difference. And the better the quality, the better nutrient density as well. And that's really what we're after, because it's those proteins, those amino acids, the vitamins, the minerals, the phytonutrients that fuel our body. And that's what makes our body run. That's what helps us go through our biochemical processes. So we need that nutrient density in order for our body to run, and so that we feel good. So quality is very important.
Just go back to just the form for a second. A lot of people, who don't like to eat vegetables or fruits or whatever their bent is, and they like to juice it. Is that really? Do you have to be careful with juicing, because you're messing with the architecture of the food, and does it change how the body takes it in and uses it?
Yeah, I think so. And that's an interesting question, because if I'm saying that we want to eat food as it was intended in nature, well, nature certainly didn't intend for you to extract the juice out of a whole, stalk of celery or a whole bunch of celery. However, I would say if somebody's going to juice their vegetables instead of drinking a Coke, well, clearly that's an improvement. But yeah, I don't typically juice, but I can see the value in it in certain circumstances. Mm-hmm. Or if somebody's extremely nutrient deficient, or they're going through a very challenging health challenge, and we need to get some nutrients into them, it might be something that can be done here and there. But no, I don't think it's a great idea to start every morning off with a juice, because, especially because of the sugar content. Pretty much no matter what you're juicing, you're going to have a high sugar content there. Right. And let's take celery juice. I know that's a popular topic, but celery is loaded with oxalates. And if somebody has a fungal issue, it's very likely that they have an oxalate issue. So that celery juice is going to just be exacerbating the problems. So, there's a lot of nuances to certain foods that people aren't aware of, like kale, another oxalate food, and spinach. We think these are superfoods and we should be eating them in as huge quantities that we can, but that's, going back to the golden rule, that's really not how nature intended it. And so I don't think that that's inherently a good idea.
Well, that's good to know, because people do think of that, especially kale. And I understand too, you have to watch where they're grown, right? So I think California, I went to a conference, they were talking about how they use the water that comes off of fracking to water the crops in California. So what on earth are they offloading into the organic and you have to think about all the toxins and chemicals that are supposedly good that they're using to, grow their plants and harvest them. It's just, there seems to be no rhyme or reason, and nobody's watching the store. Is there anything, it's again another loaded question. We have a minute for you to answer this one before the break. Who's helping us? The government doesn't seem to be doing very much. Is there anybody who's sitting here on the sideline going, you can't use this, you can't use this technique, you can't use this to as a fertilizer? Who's doing anything about this?
Yeah, there's not a lot of people. There are a few independent nonprofits or organizations like the Environmental Working Group, which does have some good information on these kinds of things, but they can't be everywhere, all the time. So there's not a police force out there. There's not a watchdog out there that is keeping a lot of these farmers or growers or big corporations, big agricultural corporations in check. So it really does fall on the consumer to make sure they know where they're getting their food from.
Well, at least if you know that you have to be your own police person, then you can do it instead of, someone is looking out for me and wants the best for me, it's always about money. And that's my mantra, follow the money. And if someone has a conflict of interest and no attention to detail and, anything goes, that's when you should be buyer beware. On that note, let's take our last break. You're living in the solution. Welcome back to Living the Solution. We're speaking with Miss Cathy Cooke, and you have a complete wellness program and health coaching as part of your services. And people need to go to wholehomeandbodyhealth.com in order to look up everything that you offer. And I know that people are going to want to know about supplements, because I don't think what they're growing is all that. We just discussed how it may be vitamin deficient, nutrition deficient. Should people supplement with vitamins and supplements? And if so, which ones are the most important?
So I think supplements have their place. I don't think it's a good idea for people to just, read an article about the latest, hottest, whatever supplement and then go take it because the article told them to. I mean, I'm definitely guilty of that. I used to do that for years when I was trying to figure out what my health problems were. But now that I know better, not every supplement is good for every person. And there are certain times in your life where one supplement might be important for you, but then, you shouldn't take any supplement forever. So in this circumstance, I think it's really important to work with a qualified professional so that they can help you identify what or which supplements are important for you, because there just isn't a general recommendation across the board because everybody's so different. And, certain supplements that are very, very important for one person can be really damaging for another person. So there's really not a great way to identify that without working with a professional. And, to your point of quality, that's extremely important too. There's a lot of unregulated kind of shenanigans going on in the supplement world. Mm-hmm. So you got to be really careful about the quality as well. Just as important as the quality of your food, the quality of your supplements is, just as important, because, I can remember years ago, I ordered a supplement from Amazon and it was melatonin, and I ordered it, and when I got the bottle, I noticed there was a sticker on it, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. I pulled the sticker on, and underneath it said that it was DHEA.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, oh my gosh, no, definitely not taking this. So I definitely do not recommend getting your supplements from Amazon or another source that is unregulated. But there are certain places, most practitioners will have a dispensary online, like Fullscript or Emerson, Ecology, which is what I use. I trust everything in their store. They carry the best brand. Once I become comfortable with the brand and I've done my homework on how they source their ingredients and their philosophy towards their production of products, then I know that I can trust that line across the board. So that's what's really important for me. And then again, just circling back to not every supplement is going to be safe for every person. So you've got to work with a professional to help you narrow down which supplements are best for you.
I think that's an excellent answer. And I can corroborate what you said, because Fullscripts is what I use for my patients as well. And it really, what you're getting. It's a standard that you're not going to go below. And I totally second what you just said about that. Now, in terms of having patients come and get assessments from you, I want to be able to send a patient to somebody who can help teach them. And that's really what you offer, right? You have sessions with the patient. This is not just a one-off. You actually become partners with them and you educate them on why they're doing certain things, why they work. In my experience, when people understand why they're doing something, then they do it. Is that how people should think about that?
That's a great way to put it. And I like that you said that, we're partners, because that's exactly it. So I take a lot of time in educating, my clients about the why, because I've worked with many practitioners in the past myself who just said, you need to supplement or you need to do this, but I didn't know why. So why, where's my motivation? What am I going to do? So that's really important. And, one of the biggest things that I work with, one of the first things off the bat with every client is I work on their circadian rhythm and their sleep, because the research out there today about an altered circadian rhythm is really profound and stunning. The connection to things like Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's, which nobody's really, looking at in detail. It's very enlightening. And so these things, I'm just using this as an example, but it's one of the most important things that I do. Getting your circadian rhythm back in tune is absolutely critical for your sleep, for your mood, for your vitamin D, for your hormone production, for your stress management. I mean, there's nothing that it doesn't cover. And I don't know many doctors that are addressing this. You probably are in your practice. You have a little bit more awareness. So, explaining the why about how it works, the sunlight first thing in the morning, getting sun on your skin during the afternoon, how it entrains your circadian rhythm, how it affects your nervous system, how it's going to improve your mood, why it's going to enhance your sleep quality and your sleep quantity. So important. So I think it's critical for our clients and patients to know the why, so that they're more motivated to do it, and then they'll start to make the connection. Oh, I'm feeling better because this is what I'm doing, just like you told me to.
It's just nothing like success, when they feel better and they're partnered in it. It's just a great feedback because it's positive. And what you just described, your circadian rhythm and getting good sleep, doesn't that have the answer to a lot of the problems? I mean, I'm looking at your website. You're talking about people with fatigue, anxiety, insomnia, chronic pain. These are like the major things that people come to see doctors for. And honestly, it's just a Band-Aid these days. So it seems like if you write this major block or this major tenet, everything else seems to fall into place from what you're describing.
Yeah, well, sleep and stress management are the two underlying things that if you don't get a handle on those, then we're not going to make progress. You could take amazing supplements and have the best diet in the world and the best attitude, but if you're not sleeping and you don't have your stress under control, you're not going to heal, because you're always going to be in your sympathetic nervous system. So you're always going to have, increased cortisol, which creates inflammation and the whole downward cascade. So sleep is absolutely critical, as is stress management. So that's why that's one of the first places I start with people, because if we're going to make any progress and we're going to heal, you have to sleep. That's when we repair. That's when the brain does its cleaning. That's when we reset our whole nervous system, our whole lymph system, everything. Everything's happening when you sleep. So it's imperative we get that dialed in. And no pharmaceutical is going to give you quality sleep. So we have to do that as naturally as possible and get you back into this, like I said, this proper circadian rhythm, so that you sleep well, and then we start to make forward progress on all of the rest of the stuff.
I'm sure it's much faster to get someone back into balance when you actually get to the root cause, instead of constantly having to take these layers off and get rid of this medication. And actually, that's my second question, a corollary. When people come to see you, are they on a lot of meds? Do you find that they've just been medicated and they just given up and I'm done, I just want to fix the problem? Is that their mindset?
Sometimes. I think that by the time people find me, they already have a pretty good understanding that medications aren't the answer. And so I definitely do have people that are on some, and I certainly, I'm not a medical doctor. I do not tell people to stop their medications, but ultimately the goal is for us to work with the medical provider to get them to a place where it's no longer needed. And, that maybe that doesn't happen. I mean, maybe in some circumstances, I'm not anti-pharmaceutical. They're important in certain times and certain places for certain people. But we definitely do not want to use them as a Band-Aid. We don't want to suppress our symptoms with them instead of finding the underlying cause. So sometimes I will occasionally get people on pharmaceuticals, and I'm really happy to say that most of those times we have been successful in getting them completely off the medication because we've addressed the underlying cause and they no longer need it, which is great. That's our ultimate goal. Let's restore the body to its natural state, its natural God-given state, which does not include pharmaceuticals, so that the body can run optimally on its own as it was designed to.
I think the body, like you just said, it's self-healing if you get out of the way and help it. And for people who have, we don't have a lot of time, but I just want to quickly talk about mold. Is there a diet that you recommend for people, if they are mold toxic, to help alleviate that and get it out of their system?
A low mold diet will start with, of course, being grain-free. Unfortunately, grains are one of the moldier foods, not because they're moldy inherently, but because of how they're stored. Corn would be a great example. So corn can be very moldy because it's stored in these huge silos, which just allow the corn to grow moldy. And so grains have that problem. So do, in a different way, root vegetables can also be moldy, which makes sense when you think about it because they're grown in this dark, damp earth. So if you look at potatoes, most of us have probably cut open a potato and seen some spots, and that's essentially mold. Carrots, beets, root vegetables are kind of off the table for people dealing with a fungal overgrowth. Sugar is off the table because, of course, it feeds mold. Fermented foods, unfortunately, need to be off the table for a while, not forever. But our beloved kombuchas, kefirs, kimchi, sauerkraut, all of these fermented foods, which can have a certain level of mold in them because they're fermented. Those need to, we need to take a break from those. And then we need to consider the oxalate foods as well, because a lot of times the byproduct of a fungal overgrowth will be high oxalate production. And that can cause symptoms like insomnia, anxiety, joint issues. Oxalates are like little spikes. They're sharp kind of crystal structures that can cause us pain in the body in different places. So we need to eliminate those sources, which, like I mentioned earlier, kale, chard, spinach, celery, cocoa, almonds, a lot of the foods that we think are superfoods and we should be eating a lot of. So we're going to keep it really clean with, some above ground vegetables like lettuces and, maybe some cucumber and radishes. There's a plethora of vegetables that are going to be good for you, along with some really good, clean grass-fed meats and eggs and some fat. And we're just going to keep it really simple. It may sound like you have nothing to eat, but it's not at all how it is. Once you get into it, you find you actually have a whole lot of options, and you're more likely to extend what you normally do. So you're going to seek out new foods, which is great because we're going to get diversity in there, and things like squashes are lovely. So we're, and keeping it simple actually helps. It helps with the overwhelm because people are like, I don't know what to eat, but we're going to narrow it down. We're going to make it really simple. Here's some lovely, beautiful foods you can eat. And, the quicker we do that and the more adherent we are to that, the much quicker we're going to see progress and we're going to start to feel better. And then we can start to expand our choices, which is where everybody wants to be.
Well, it sounds like if you can make a difference and also find something new, it's nothing better than finding a new way to handle things and feel better in the process. Now, in the seconds that we have, how can people reach you and gauge your services?
Yes. Well, you mentioned my website a few times, and that's the best place for people to get a hold of me, wholehomeandbodyhealth.com. And people can email me or call me. I also have a YouTube channel where I've got many tens of videos, mostly on EMF and a few other things, if you wanted to dig into that a little deeper. And yeah, that's where the best place that people can reach me.
Well, Ms. Cooke, thank you. Time goes way too fast. I want to thank you so much for coming on. It was enlightening and really fun talking with you. So thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you, Dr. George. This has been a real pleasure. And thank you so much for the work that you do.
Oh, right back at you. And thank you, everybody, for living in the solution.
Revolutionary talk for revolutionary times. Liberty Talk FM.